If you ask plenty musicians, them know it, but them can't do it.
Bob Marley might have sung about one love, but let's be real, there were a few folks he'd rather not have around the campfire. While the man was chill on the outside, Bob had serious opinions and didn't keep them to himself. We're talking about reggae's king standing firm on politics, music, and people who just rubbed him the wrong way. So, if you thought Marley was too mellow to feud, you're about to get educated, nicely, but still. From cultural sellouts to the British monarchy, let's take a look at the rare few who caught some side-eye from the legend himself. But before we do that, let's get to know Bob a little better. Early Bob. Before he became reggae royalty, Bob Marley was just a kid chasing music through static-filled radio waves and dirt roads in rural Jamaica. His story didn't start with stadiums or gold records. It began on a farm in a tiny village called 9 Mile, born to a teenage Afro-Jamaican girl, and a much older white man who called himself Captain, but never made it past private in the British Army. That's not a metaphor. That's his actual dad. Bob was born on February 6, 1945, to Cedella Malcolm and Norval Marley. Norval was in his 60s and allegedly supervising land development for war veterans when he and Cedella got married. Their relationship was brief and distant. Norval gave little support, barely visited, and died when Bob was 10. That left Cedella to raise her son in a country still shaped by colonization, poverty, and cultural division. There's a rumor that Marley's birth name was Nesta Robert Marley, but a passport official switched it around, thinking Nesta sounded too feminine. Whether or not that's true, the name Bob Marley would soon echo across the globe. But first, he had to learn how to sing. Bob's first major influence came from his grandfather Omariah, a Mayal healer and early spiritual figure in his life. But it was in primary school that Bob found his musical partner in crime, Neville Livingston, who you might know better as Bunny Wailer. The two became fast friends at Stepney Primary in 9 Mile. At 12, Bob and his mom moved to Trenchtown, one of Kingston's roughest areas. But with struggle came opportunity. Bob and Bunny moved into the same house, since their parents were now in a relationship and had a daughter together, Claudette Pearl. That household was loud, in a good way. It was full of rhythm, ska, and American R&B bouncing through cheap radios from across the Caribbean Sea. With Peter Tosh joining in, the trio formed a vocal group that changed names like They Changed Socks until they landed on just the Wailers. They didn't play instruments at first, they just wanted to sing. Luckily, they had a neighbor named Joe Higgs, already a success in Jamaica's music scene, who took them under his wing. He coached them on harmony, timing, and eventually taught Marley how to play guitar. Without him, Marley might have just been another voice in the Trenchtown breeze. From country kid to king of conscious sound, Bob Marley's start was anything but smooth. But his roots ran deep, and they were already starting to grow through concrete. Career beginnings. Before Bob Marley became the voice of reggae, he was out here working factory shifts and trying to get studio time wherever he could. This wasn't some overnight fame situation. It was years of grinding, bad contracts, and figuring out what the sound of rebellion was supposed to feel like. In 1962, Marley recorded his very first tracks at Federal Studios in Kingston. The songs were Judge Not, One Cup of Coffee, Do You Still Love Me, and Terror. One of them was even released under the name Bobby Martell. Why? Because when you're unknown and trying to get on a record, you do what the producer tells you, period. By 1963, Bob and a group of young singers, Bunny Wailer, Peter Tosh, and a few others, started calling themselves the Teenagers. Not the most creative name, but hey, they were kids. They eventually settled on the Wailers, and soon they had a hit called Simmer Down that sold about 70,000 copies in Jamaica. That's a big deal for an island with more goats than record stores. The band's early years were messy in the way all great origin stories are. People came and went. Names change every few months. But by 1906, the core trio were locked in. That same year, Marley married Rita Anderson, then bounced to Delaware to live near his mom. He worked at DuPont and Chrysler under a fake name, Donald Marley. Can you imagine? Bob Marley running a forklift while probably humming about Babylon the whole time. Once back in Jamaica, Bob had a falling out with producer Coxsone Dodd and linked up with Lee Scratch Perry. Their partnership was short but powerful. resulting in some of the Wailers' most respected early tracks. By 1969, reggae had officially taken shape, slower, heavier, and full of electric guitar. That's when Marley worked with producer Leslie Kong and laid down tracks like Soul Shakedown Party and Stop That Train. In the early 1970s, the Wailers tried breaking into the US market by re-recording songs and experimenting with new sounds. Some of it leaned more pop than reggae, including rare doo-wop-style demos made in New York. The big break came in 1972 when Island Records' Chris Blackwell gave Marley and the Wailers a 4,000 advance to record Catch a Fire. It was reggae, but dressed like rock, and it worked. The album was a hit with critics, and the follow-up, Burnin', included I Shot the Sheriff, which Eric Clapton turned into a US chart topper. Marley was no longer just a singer. He was a movement in the making. Later career, most artists would have canceled everything after getting shot. Bob Marley, he wrapped up the bullet wounds and went on stage 2 days later. That's the kind of fire that fueled the next chapter of his career and pushed him from local legend to global icon. After the original Wailers broke up, Marley didn't skip a beat. He kept recording under Bob Marley and the Wailers with a new lineup. The Barrett brothers held down the rhythm section. Carlton on drums and Aston Family Man on bass. Lead guitars came courtesy of Junior Marvin and Al Anderson. Keyboards, Tyrone Downey and Earl Waya Lindo. Add percussionist Alvin Seco Patterson and backing vocals from the I-Threes, Marcia Griffiths, Judy Mowat, and Bob's wife Rita, and you've got a full band that could shake the walls off a stadium. In 1975, Marley scored his first big international hit with a live version of No Woman, No Cry. That track made people stop and pay attention, especially outside Jamaica. Then came Rastaman Vibration, which cracked the US charts and let everyone know Marley was officially not just for island radios anymore. But everything changed in December 1976. Just days before a free concert called Smile Jamaica, organized by Prime Minister Michael Manley, gunmen stormed Marley's home and shot him, his wife Rita, and his manager Don Taylor. Marley got hit in the chest and arm. Instead of canceling, he showed up to the show, wounded, and performed for 80,000 people. With most of the Wailers in hiding, he played backed by members of Zap Pow, because, of course, he did. By the end of that year, Bob had had enough. He left Jamaica and moved to England, calling it a break, but really just keeping it moving. He spent a month in the Bahamas to heal, then got to work in London, where he recorded Exodus and Kaya. That's when things exploded. Exodus stayed on the UK charts for over a year and gave us tracks like Jamming, Waiting in Vain, and One Love. He even got arrested in London for a small amount of weed because Bob was going to be Bob, no matter what city he was in. In 1978, he returned to Jamaica and pulled off another miracle, getting two political enemies, Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, to shake hands on stage during the One Love peace concert. At this point, Marley wasn't just a singer. He was the voice of resistance, healing, and rebellion. And he wasn't done yet. Final years? Most people would have stopped. Bob Marley didn't. Even after doctors told him he had cancer, even after his body began to give out, he kept showing up. On stage, in the studio, in the fight. It wasn't just music to him. It was a mission. In July 1907, Marley learned that the dark spot under his big toe wasn't from a soccer injury like folks assumed. It was something way more serious, a rare form of skin cancer called acral lentiginous melanoma. This type doesn't show up where you'd expect. It hides out under toenails or on the bottoms of feet, making it easy to miss and hard to treat, especially for people with darker skin. At the time, most medical books didn't even mention it. Doctors told Marley the safest move was to amputate the toe, but he said no. He didn't want to stop performing, and his faith also played a role in the decision. Instead, they removed the nail and the surrounding tissue and used skin from his thigh to cover the area. He didn't slow down. He kept recording, kept touring, and started planning a global tour for 1980. That year, he dropped Uprising, one of his most spiritually charged albums. Then came the European tour. His Milan show pulled in 100,000 people. This was the biggest crowd of his career. His last outdoor performance happened in Dublin. He moved on to the United States and lit up Madison Square Garden. But then, things took a sharp turn. On September 21st, 1980, Marley collapsed while jogging in Central Park. When doctors examined him, they found the cancer had spread to his brain, lungs, and liver. Just 2 days later, he performed one last time at the Stanley Theater in Pittsburgh. There are only a few photos from that show. The rest is just legend. After that, everything stopped. The tour was canceled. Marley went to Germany to try an alternative treatment that involved strict dietary restrictions and detox methods. It didn't work. In May 1981, he boarded a plane to return to Jamaica, but his condition worsened mid-flight. The plane landed in Miami, where he was rushed to the hospital. Bob Marley died on May 11, 1981, at just 36 years old. His final words to his son Ziggy were simple but powerful. "On your way up, take me up. On your way down, don't let me down." Jamaica gave him a full state funeral. They laid him to rest in 9 Mile with his guitar, a Bible, and a stalk of cannabis. Artist list. Bob Marley might have preached peace, but that didn't mean he got along with everyone. Behind the smooth voice and laid-back vibe was a man who stood firm in his beliefs, and sometimes that meant calling people out. Let's take a look at the rare few who found themselves on Marley's bad side. Peter Tosh. Bob Marley and Peter Tosh started as brothers in rhythm, but by the mid-70s, they were standing on opposite sides of the reggae revolution. What began as a trio of equals turned into a one-man spotlight, and Tosh wasn't about to play backup in a band he helped build. Tosh and Marley were both original members of the Wailers, forming the group in the early 1960s with Bunny Livingston. Together, they created some of the earliest hits in ska, rocksteady, and reggae. But when Island Records signed them in 1972, things shifted, fast. Island's boss, Chris Blackwell, saw a star in Bob Marley. His charisma, look, and global appeal checked every box. Suddenly, the Wailers looked more like Bob Marley and the Wailers. Tosh, who had taught Marley to play guitar back in the day, wasn't feeling the downgrade. And Bunny wasn't into the touring life. So, by the end of the Burnin' Tour in 1973, both had stepped away. Peter didn't just walk out, he left swinging. During that final UK tour, the tension between Marley and Tosh hit a boiling point. According to Marley's biographer Stephen Davis, the two even came to blows backstage. This was no creative disagreement. It was ego, frustration, and a fight for space that had been shrinking for Tosh with every headline Bob got. In interviews later, Tosh made it clear he felt disrespected and minimized. "I taught Bob Marley," he once said. "How can you compare the teacher with the taught?" Oof. He even dubbed Island Records the Isle of Crooks for how he believed they favored Marley while ignoring his own contributions. After walking away in 1974, Tosh launched a solo career that hit just as hard. Tracks like Legalize It and Equal Rights didn't just vibe, they roared. He became known for fiery lyrics, militant energy, and a fearless call-out of systems of oppression. Where Marley sang about unity, Tosh screamed about injustice. Still, their split wasn't all bitterness. At the One Love Peace concert in 1978, the two shared a stage again. Marley brought political enemies together for a handshake. Tosh brought fire to the mic and called out the same government. It was clear. They were still brothers, just marching to different beats. Michael Manley. Bob Marley just wanted to sing about peace. But in the 1970s, Jamaica even peace came with a political price, and Marley ended up right in the middle of the storm. The country was on edge. Prime Minister Michael Manley's People's National Party and the rival Jamaica Labour Party were not just throwing words at each other. These parties were tied to violent street clashes, where politics often turned into gunfire. Gangs were heavily involved, and every neighborhood felt like a battlefield. Marley was a national icon. His music was everywhere, and so was his message of unity and freedom. But in a country that saw everything through a political lens, Bob's refusal to back any one side was not seen as neutral. It was seen as suspicious. Manley's party wanted Marley's influence on their side. That's where the Smile Jamaica concert came in. The event was supposed to promote peace, but its timing raised eyebrows. Just 2 days before the show, Marley, his wife Rita, and his manager were shot inside their home. Many suspected the attack was connected to politics, and the concert started to look less like a peace offering and more like a political move. Despite being injured, Marley went on stage and gave a powerful performance in front of a crowd of around 80,000. It was a legendary moment, but it did not happen in a vacuum. Other performers made bold political statements that night too. Jacob Miller sang about recent violence using the melody of a folk song, lit a giant joint, and then placed a police helmet on his head right in front of the Prime Minister. No one dared stop him. Then came Peter Tosh, who took it even further. Tosh stood on stage and told Manley to his face that he was not doing enough for the poor. The crowd stirred. Things got tense. But Tosh, always sharp, shifted to a long version of his song Legalize It, calming things down. Even though Marley never officially supported any political party, his relationship with Manley made it seem like he leaned toward the government. That was enough to make him a target. Bob Marley wanted his music to unite people, not divide them. But in the 1970s, Jamaica, his fame and message made him more than a musician. They made him a symbol, and in a country divided by politics, symbols were dangerous. Chris Blackwell. When Bob Marley handed over the master tapes for Catch a Fire, he was unknowingly stepping into a storm that would forever change reggae and divide the Wailers. The man waiting for those tapes in London was Chris Blackwell, the founder of Island Records. Blackwell had a bold vision: make reggae palatable to rock fans. He brought in blues guitarist Wayne Perkins to add solos on tracks like Concrete Jungle and Stir It Up, blending roots reggae with rock sensibilities. That gamble paid off, helping Marley break into international markets. But not everyone applauded. Many in Marley's circle saw Blackwell as a businessman first and a culture shifter second. While Bob seemed to respect Blackwell, others like Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer felt betrayed. Jamaican attorney Miguel Lorne did not hold back. He accused Blackwell of deliberately dismantling the group for profit. According to him, Blackwell saw Marley's mixed-race heritage as a marketing advantage for white audiences. The accusations did not stop there. Former publicist Maxine Stowe claimed that Bunny Wailer's identity and contributions were systematically erased in favor of Marley's image. She argued that the legacy of the Wailers was diluted and rebranded as Marley's solo project, while others were pushed to the background. Stowe believed that entire generations now associate Bob Marley and the Wailers with Bob alone, forgetting the trio that once made the music together. Blackwell, in his memoir The Islander, offered a different perspective. He admitted that Tosh and Bunny felt threatened when he and Marley began remixing Catch a Fire in London. They had fought to keep the group alive through hard times and did not want to see it reshaped. Blackwell pointed out that Bunny, a devout Rastafarian, was uncomfortable with the venues they were expected to play, such as college clubs and rock stages. Peter Tosh reportedly called Blackwell Whitewell behind his back, accusing him of favoring Bob due to his European ancestry. But Blackwell insisted his focus was never racial. He believed in Bob because Bob had the most songs, the biggest vision, and unmatched charisma. He also noted that he lent money to the Marley family to help them secure Bob's rights after his death. That prevented those rights from being sold to outside buyers like Michael Jackson. Bob Marley became the face of reggae, but that rise came with real consequences. The rift between bandmates, the image battles, and the question of authenticity all shaped the complex story of Bob Marley and the Wailers. Bunny Wailer. In the rising tide of reggae's global takeover, one man chose conviction over commercial success. Bunny Wailer, one of the original architects of the Wailers, stepped away from the group at the peak of its ascent. It was not because he lacked talent or ambition, but because he refused to bend his beliefs for the spotlight. As the Wailers gained traction beyond Jamaica, they were suddenly in demand across Europe and the United States. Bunny, along with Peter Tosh and Bob Marley, had once shared center stage as equals. But as the music reached new ears and record deals came knocking, the group's center of gravity began to shift. Attention turned more and more toward Marley, who became the face of the movement, while Bunny and Tosh found themselves increasingly pushed to the margins. Though Bunny initially joined the band on tours abroad, his heart never left Jamaica. The fast pace of global fame and the demands of international touring clashed with his deepening commitment to the Rastafari faith. The final straw came when Island Records' Chris Blackwell suggested that the Wailers should perform in clubs that Bunny believed contradicted his spiritual path. For Bunny, playing in those venues meant betraying the very roots of the music they had built together. By 1973, he had made his choice. Bunny left the group, shedding the last name Livingston and embracing the simpler moniker Bunny as he launched a solo career rooted in spiritual depth. His music took on a more introspective tone, filled with messages of faith, African identity, and resistance to cultural compromise. While Bob Marley became a global icon, Bunny chose a quieter path, one that prioritized integrity over influence. The relationship between Bunny and Marley after the split was complex. There was no public feud in the style of Peter Tosh's pointed remarks. but there was clear tension. Bunny was never afraid to question whether Marley had strayed too far from the foundational messages of Rastafari. For Bunny, the mission was never about selling out stadiums. It was about spreading truth. Bunny Wailer may not have become the household name that Bob Marley did, but his departure from the group was not an exit. It was a stand, a refusal to dilute the message for mass approval. His voice may not have echoed as loudly around the world, but it carried the weight of unshakable faith. Edward Seaga. It was not just another concert. It was not just another Marley moment. On the night of April 22, 1978, Bob Marley transformed a Kingston stadium into a stage for political theater and spiritual rebellion. The One Love Peace concert wasn't only about good vibes. It was a risky, revolutionary act aimed at pulling a wounded country back from the edge. By the late 1970s, Jamaica was a powder keg. Street wars were erupting not over turf, but over politics. The People's National Party, PNP, led by Prime Minister Michael Manley, clashed violently with the opposition Jamaica Labour Party, JLP, under Edward Seaga. For many Jamaicans, this was more than a two-party scuffle. It was a proxy conflict wrapped in class struggle, Cold War influence, and local corruption. Bob Marley, already an international icon, tried to avoid taking sides. He did not trust either Manley's socialist promises or Seaga's alignment with the economic elite and foreign backers. But Marley did believe in the power of unity, and when rival gang leaders, inspired by the messages of Rastafari, agreed to peace talks, the One Love Peace concert was born. The plan? To gather the biggest names in reggae, the street dons, and both political heavyweights in one place. That night, in front of 30,000 fans, Marley took his message further than anyone expected. While performing Jammin', he did not just sing about peace, he acted it out. He called Manley and Seaga on stage, grabbed their hands, and raised them high above his head. Flashbulbs popped, the crowd roared. For a moment, it looked like the island might actually turn a corner. But the truth, as always, was more complicated. Marley's gesture was not an endorsement of either politician. It was a desperate plea for the original dream of justice, equality, and self-determination to survive the violence that had begun to drown it. Scholars and insiders have long suspected foreign intervention, including covert operations, played a role in Jamaica's unrest. Marley's symbolic handshake did not ignore these forces. It challenged them. Africana scholar Brian Meeks, who witnessed the concert firsthand, later recalled the electric energy in the stadium that night. Yet even such a powerful image could not stop the bloodshed. The violence did not vanish, the change was not immediate, but Marley's message endured. That raised hand moment became a global symbol, not because it solved Jamaica's problems, but because it dared to ask if music could still be mightier than the gun. Eric Clapton. When Bob Marley wrote I Shot the Sheriff, he was not just crafting a catchy track. He was voicing a spiritual protest wrapped in rhythm and resistance. So, when Eric Clapton's cover version soared to #1, while Marley's original barely received radio play, even in Jamaica, Bob was not exactly thrilled. Clapton's 1974 version became the only chart-topping single of his career. On the surface, it looked like a breakthrough for reggae music, finally reaching global audiences. But for Marley, it felt like a hollow victory. His message, deeply rooted in struggle, spirituality, and social justice, was being repackaged as a laid-back pop song by someone far removed from the culture that birthed it. Marley never publicly condemned Clapton by name, but he was vocal about his discomfort with white artists gaining popularity through reggae, while its creators remained in the background. He often said reggae was more than just music. It was a message, a movement, and a reflection of the Jamaican identity shaped by oppression and resistance. What really struck a nerve was the fact that Clapton's version received more airplay in Jamaica than Marley's own new single, Natty Dread. According to author Stephen Davis, the top Jamaican radio station played Clapton's version regularly, while Marley's music was ignored. This upset Marley so much that he reportedly visited the Jamaican Broadcasting Corporation himself to confront the disc jockeys. Known for his peaceful presence, this act of direct confrontation showed just how deeply he felt about the issue. The irony deepened when fans learned the real meaning behind the song. In the documentary Bob Marley, The Making of a Legend, it was revealed that the sheriff represented a doctor who prescribed birth control pills to Marley's partner. Bob believed those pills symbolized a form of spiritual oppression, a force that tried to cut off life before it had a chance to grow. This message added a deeper layer to the famous lyric, "Every time I plant a seed, he said kill it before it grow." Today, Marley's version of "I Shot the Sheriff" is seen as the definitive one. Clapton's cover may have introduced reggae to new audiences, but it is Marley's voice, message, and meaning that continue to resonate. This story highlights a painful but important truth. Even revolutionary art can be sidelined or softened when it challenges the system it seeks to change. From Peter Tosh's bitter departure to Bunny Wailer's quiet disapproval, and Eric Clapton's chart-topping cover that left Marley fuming, the reggae icon's journey was not free of tension, betrayal, or bruised egos. Even within his own band, Marley had to navigate complex relationships, shifting power dynamics, and the heavy weight of fame that didn't always spread evenly among the Wailers. And let's not forget the political minefield of Jamaican leadership, where Marley was both revered and used. From backroom politics to radio station showdowns, Marley's life was a constant balancing act between peace and protest. But despite the feuds and fractured friendships, Bob never lost sight of the bigger picture. Unity, revolution, and redemption were still the rhythms that beat in his chest until the very end. These conflicts only deepen our understanding of his music and message. They show us that even legends are human, wrestling with loyalty, legacy, and the cost of greatness. If you enjoyed this dive into the more complicated corners of Bob Marley's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more untold stories behind the icons who changed music forever.